When a group of friends stumbles upon an abandoned cabin in the woods, what they uncover inside turns their dream vacation into a nightmare they'll never forget. Hi, my name is Maya. I'm 25 years old, living in the city with my boyfriend Kevin. Honestly, things have been tough lately. Kevin lost his job a few months ago, and money has been really tight. We had been staying with my parents for a while to get back on our feet, but you know how it is living with parents as an adult, it just starts to weigh on you after a while. You feel like you've lost your independence. Kevin was going stir-crazy just sitting around the house all day. We both were. So when we saw this suspiciously cheap apartment listing on Craigslist, it seemed too good to be true. But Kevin was desperate to get us out of my parents' place. I'll admit, I kind of loved the idea of having our own little nest again, a fresh start. Despite the little voice of doubt in the back of my mind, we took it. I should have listened to that voice. It all started out pretty mundane and normal at first. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a basic one-bedroom in an older building on the rougher side of town. But it was clean, the landlord seemed nice enough, and hey, we could actually afford it. Those first few days we were just relieved to be out on our own again. We went to the grocery store, cooked dinners together, and binge-watched some shows on Netflix in the evenings. All that simple, blessed normalcy. We had been craving petty disagreements about leaving dishes in the sink, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. I missed those silly arguments when things started to go wrong. It probably began around the fourth or fifth night. I woke up sometime after 11 p.m. to use the bathroom. As I was coming out, I heard the most terrifying sound: a woman screaming. No, screaming doesn't even describe it properly. It was this blood-curdling, ripping shriek of pure fear and agony. It made my blood run cold. I shook Kevin awake in a panic. "Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble. We have to call the police," I said. He tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a TV or something from another apartment. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't normal. Right then, there was frantic knocking at our door, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Kevin motioned for me to stay back as he carefully went over and opened it a crack. It was our landlord, Mr. Kozak. He had this disturbingly casual smile on his face as he said, "No need for alarm, folks. Just a little disagreement between a couple of tenants. But it's being taken care of, so no need to call the authorities, okay?" The way he said it with such a total lack of concern was so bizarrely off-putting, almost like he was amused by the whole thing. I shivered despite the warm night. "If you're sure, mister," Kozak, Kevin said uneasily. "We'd still hate to be a bother. We can call if anything else comes up." "Oh, there's no bother at all. But please, if you do happen to see or hear anything unsettling, don't go calling the cops, please. That never ends well for anyone, mister." Kozak chuckled as if he just told a hilarious joke. "You two seem like such a nice, smart young couple. Why don't you just give me a ring directly if any future unpleasantness arises?" "I'll get it sorted out," he gave an overconfident wink, then without another word, turned and headed back down the dingy hallway, whistling some eerily cheery tune. The look Kevin and I exchanged in the wake of that supremely unsettling encounter said it all. We both knew deep down that something was deeply wrong here with Kozak, with this whole place. But what choice did we have? We were broke and hadn't even unpacked all our things yet, so we tried our best to just ignore it. Chalk it up to the landlord being some eccentric old man and hope things didn't get any weirder. Oh, how I wish I could go back to the naive mindset of those first few nights, unburdened by the sickening realizations that were still to come. It started with the small things at first, like hearing strange noises in the night. Not just screams this time, but occasional muffled thumps and the sounds of people frantically running up and down the halls, always at the most unholy hours between midnight and 4 a.m. Whenever I brought it up to Kevin, he got this glazed, half-asleep look in his eyes and denied hearing anything out of the ordinary. Part of me wondered if he was just trying to reassure me, to cling to some sense of normalcy in our new home. Another part of me knew he heard those noises too, and was just as terrified as I was. Then more bizarre events started occurring. Strangers would randomly knock at our door at all hours. Just dazed-looking men reeking of booze or worse. Kozak said it would be okay, or this is where I'm supposed to go. We stuck to the cardinal rule of never opening the door to those sketchy individuals, but the implications of what they were showing up for made my blood run cold. Kevin and I didn't even want to voice our darkest suspicions out loud. Despite the escalating weirdness, we both felt so trapped. Neither of us had jobs at that point, and we had blown what little savings we had on the move and security deposit. Where the hell else could we go? Then came the night that fully shattered any remaining illusions, the night that pushed us past the breaking point. I woke up around 2 a.m. to Kevin tossing and turning, mumbling incoherently in his sleep. I tried to gently shake him awake, growing more frantic as he wouldn't rouse. Finally, his eyes flashed open, wild and unfocused. He looked right through me with zero recognition. "Kevin, babe, what's wrong? You were having a nightmare." That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a young woman crying, sobbing in pure hopeless despair. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door. My heart stopped as I realized whatever nightmare had been plaguing Kevin. He likely heard those cries too. We had the same horrific implications about what they meant. I wanted so badly to run out there, pound on that door, but I'd seen enough crime documentaries to know that's exactly how young women end up dead and abandoned in lots. So we just sat there, petrified, listening to those tormented wails that went on forever. Eventually, they trailed off into a deathly silence, even more chilling. I knew deep down we couldn't spend another night in this waking nightmare. Not after that. The next morning, we packed up as quickly and quietly as humanly possible. I didn't even care about getting the security deposit back at that point. Nothing was worth sticking around that hellhole a second longer. As we were dragging our meager belongings out to the cab, Kozak emerged from the shadows and flashed that same sickening grin. "Leaving so soon? I do hope every accommodation was to your liking during your stay," he said, letting out this wheezy chuckle that made my skin crawl. Kevin urged me past without a word or eye contact. We never looked back. So there you have it. We got out, but so many mysteries remain. Just what kind of unspeakable depravities were happening behind those paper-thin walls? Who were those poor souls we heard screaming and crying out so desperately? And most of all, what did Kozak mean by accommodation? Was he implying we were somehow complicit by our silence, by witnessing those horrors and doing nothing? I try not to dwell on it, but those questions still haunt me. If only we'd had the resources to go somewhere else right away. If only we'd found the courage to report Kozak, no matter how ominous his warnings. If only. In the end, I suppose we'll never know the full truth. But one thing's for certain from now on, we're never taking too good to be true apartment listings on Craigslist ever again. Some horrors are better left undiscovered. Trapped in a remote cabin with a sadistic psychopath, one woman must navigate a harrowing night of terror to survive. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. He took a step closer, then another. That's when he pulled something from behind his back, something long and metal reflecting the moonlight. Oh God, it was a gun. Looking back, I should have screamed, tried to run, called the police, anything. But I just lay there paralyzed as this man from Craigslist walked across the room towards me. I squeezed my eyes shut as he leaned over the bed, waiting for him to pull the trigger or plunge a knife through my chest. But he didn't do either of those things. I opened my eyes to find Steve's face just inches from mine. His rancid breath overwhelmed me as his cracked lips parted in a sick grin. Before I could react, he was on top of me, his huge frame pinning me down effortlessly. He laughed as I squirmed and writhed underneath him, like he enjoyed the struggle or something. Then he did something that will haunt me until my dying day. He leaned in and ran the barrel of the gun across my cheek, then down over my lips, letting it linger there as I whimpered before finally pulling it away and pressing the cold steel against my temple. "Do everything I say, and you'll make it out of this alive," he growled. "Understand?" I managed a frantic nod, tears streaming down my face at this point. He pulled me up by my hair, shoving me towards the small bathroom. "Get in the shower," he commanded, motioning with the gun. "And don't think about trying anything funny, or I won't hesitate to put a bullet through your head." I felt utterly humiliated as I stripped off my clothes, Steve's eyes raking over every inch of my bare skin. He ordered me to turn on the water, making me stand there shivering and naked under the stream while he watched from the doorway. Eventually, he barked at me to wash myself, and I obeyed, choking back sobs the whole time. Once he was satisfied, he threw a towel at me and told me to dry off. I can't begin to explain the sheer terror that gripped me as I stood there, soaking wet, knowing I was at the complete mercy of this psychopath. Steve ordered me to sit on the edge of the bed, staring intently at me the whole time, as if daring me to make a wrong move. The minutes stretched into an eternity as he paced back and forth, muttering to himself under his breath. Finally, he stopped and looked directly at me with those cold, dead eyes. "Now you're going to do exactly what I say, no questions asked. And maybe, just maybe, I'll let you live. He pointed the gun at my chest again. Stand up and get dressed. We're going for a little drive. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurriedly pulled on my clothes, praying for some kind of miracle to get me out of this. But deep down, I knew that once Steve had me in his car, there would be no escape. The drive through the deserted streets felt like a surreal nightmare. Steve kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his gun, eyes flicking over to me every so often as if to remind me who was in charge. I had no idea where he was taking me, but the destination didn't really matter. All I could focus on was the gun and the unspoken threat it represented. Finally, Steve pulled into a secluded parking lot and cut the engine. "Get out," he ordered, motioning with the gun. My legs felt like jelly as I climbed out of the car, my mind racing with possible escape plans, all of them ending in a bullet to the head. Steve led me towards a dilapidated building, pushing me inside and down a dark, narrow hallway. My heart sank as we reached a door at the end, and he shoved me inside, locking the door behind us. The room was small and windowless, with a single bare bulb casting eerie shadows on the walls. Steve ordered me to sit on the bed, then began pacing again, the gun never leaving his hand. "You're going to stay here until I say otherwise," he snarled. "Don't try to escape, don't try to call for help. I'll be watching, and if you do anything stupid, I will kill you. Understand?" I nodded numbly, too terrified to speak. Steve left the room, locking the door behind him. I was alone, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. Hours passed, though it felt like days. I huddled on the bed, trying to stay calm, but the fear and anxiety were overwhelming. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound made me jump, terrified that Steve would come back and carry out his threats. Finally, the door creaked open, and Steve walked back in. He looked at me with a twisted smile. "You've been a good girl," he said, almost mockingly. "So I'm going to let you go. But remember, if you ever tell anyone about this, I will find you and kill you. Understand?" I nodded frantically, desperate to be free of this nightmare. Steve motioned for me to stand up and follow him. He led me back to the car and drove me to a random street corner, shoving me out of the car without another word. As he drove away, I collapsed on the sidewalk, sobbing uncontrollably, grateful to be alive but forever haunted by the events of that night. What would you do if you found a hidden compartment in your new car, filled with chilling secrets that suggest the previous owner was a monster? Hey, I'm Martin, but some folks call me Hope. I'm 34 and a software developer living in Seattle. Recently, I've been going through a tough time. My girlfriend Jen and I broke up 6 months ago after being together for 5 years. It was messy, and I'm still not over it. I decided to move and get a fresh start, which included selling my car because it held too many memories of Jen and me. I found a decent deal on Craigslist for a 2015 Honda Civic. I had no idea that buying this car would turn my life into a nightmare. When I met the seller to check out the car, everything seemed normal. The seller, Bill, was a middle-aged guy who was very friendly. He said he was upgrading to a newer model. The car looked good, no major dents or scratches. I took it for a test drive, and everything seemed fine. We finalized the paperwork for $8,500, and I drove my new Civic back to my apartment. A few days later, I decided to clean the interior. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. Underneath the back seat cushions, I found a hidden compartment. It was a small door carved into the trunk area, leading to a tiny enclosed space between the rear seats and the trunk. I couldn't understand why a regular car would have something like this, unless it was for a sinister purpose. When I looked inside the cramped compartment, I felt sick. It smelled of stale sweat and something more sinister. Shining my phone's light inside, I saw streaks of dried brown liquid that looked like blood. Feeling nauseous, I quickly closed the compartment and stepped back, overwhelmed with dread. What terrible things had the previous owner, Bill, done with this vehicle? Had he used the secret room to transport victims he had harmed or killed? The questions swirled in my mind, each more horrifying than the last. I realized I was now connected to something deeply disturbing and possibly criminal. Part of me wanted to go straight to the authorities to report my finding and put as much distance as possible between me and whatever depravity this vehicle had witnessed. But another part of me, influenced by crime shows and horror movies, worried that coming forward might make me a person of interest, even a suspect. So I did nothing for the time being. I tried my best to go about my daily life and not think about the ominous secret compartment, but how could I not? Every time I opened the trunk or slid into the driver's seat, I was assaulted by phantom smells and visions of unimaginable horrors. The subtle stain of dread resurfaced, leaving me uneasy and tormented by morbid hypotheticals. Restless nights were punctuated by vivid nightmares, visions of being trapped in that cramped, sweaty compartment, banging hopelessly on the door, gulping stale air as my cries for help went unanswered. Other times I dreamt I was Bill, a mild-mannered monster calmly shuttling my unspeakable cargo to its grim destination. Awake, I began noticing small details about the vehicle that had previously escaped me. A splotch of reddish-brown discoloration in the trunk lining, strange symbols etched into the underside of the dashboard, and the faint acrid scent of chemicals lingering in the cabin's recirculated air. Each observation fed the cycle of dread and fueled my imagination to even darker places. After a week of inner torment, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I would remove the wretched compartment, scrub the vehicle clean of any lingering remnants of its prior purpose, and be done with it once and for all. Armed with a toolkit and a bucket of industrial cleaner, I set about dismantling the hidden room. As I carefully pried away its flimsy wooden panels, I knew my plan was doomed to fail. Tucked amid the sickly beige upholstery was a small cardboard box. Its contents promised to further unravel what remained of my sanity. Inside, I found handwritten notes scrawled in what seemed to be chicken scratch. Pages and pages of rambling, half-coherent screeds vacillated between records of apparent daily minutiae and grandiose proclamations about bearing witness to an ethical truth. Certain chilling phrases leapt off the page. They're everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Horrible, unblinking eyes peering through the veil at all times. Can't let them steal my essence, not after coming this far. Another page, decorated with strange symbols reminiscent of those on the dashboard, read the time of transformation draws near. The offering prepares the vessel to shrug off its withered husk and be remade anew, incorruptible and eternal. As I read on, slack-jawed in disbelief, it became clear these were no ordinary unhinged ramblings. Something larger and far more insidious bound them together. As I sit here clutching those cryptic pages, part of me wants nothing more than to shove them back into the shadows and return to blissful ignorance. To move on from this existential detour and find some semblance of normalcy again, pushing bile-inducing questions of cosmic dread from my mind. But another part, call it sickening curiosity, or a deficit of self-preservation, feels inextricably drawn to unraveling this disturbing saga, even if the truth is too horrific to behold. For now, the mysterious compartment sits reopened in the car, almost daring me to keep pulling at its sickening threads. While part of me craves a return to blissful ignorance, another part can't resist the lure of the unknown. Imagine hearing strange noises in the middle of the night, only to discover something chilling left outside your front door. This happened to me after I posted my address online. You won't believe what happened next. I've been home alone for a few days in an empty apartment. Recently, my boyfriend got a great job offer in another state. We've wanted to leave Florida for a while, so when he got the job, we packed up and moved, even though we'd already paid rent for a whole month at our old place. I didn't get to say goodbye to some close friends, so I came back alone to spend a couple more weeks here. Luckily, my job allows me to work remotely, so I still have a good place to work and keep busy. The apartment isn't completely empty because I had a big piece of furniture that I decided to sell instead of moving it. I listed it on Craigslist with my address. The furniture sold the same day, but after that, strange things started happening. At first, I didn't think much of it. I have a cat, so I'm used to hearing noises. I thought it was just him being mischievous. But then I remembered we took the cat to our new place. While lying on my air mattress reading, I heard a lot of noise from the kitchen. I found some cups that had been on the counter were now on the floor. I thought the fan blew them off, but it didn't make sense. The cups had been there all day, and the fan had been on for hours. I tried not to think about it, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise like someone shaking a jar of coins or keys. It was really loud and seemed to come from outside. As soon as I got out of bed, the noise stopped. I couldn't find the source, so I went back to bed with the lights on. In the morning, I noticed all the lights were off. I don't sleepwalk, so I couldn't understand why. Later, I couldn't find my keys in my purse. I thought maybe I left them in the freezer with the groceries or on the kitchen counter, but I checked everywhere, and they weren't there. Then I remembered the jingling sound I heard during the night. I checked outside even though it was unlikely for my keys to be there. The only way they could have ended up outside is if they fell out of my bag when I came into the house. I stepped outside and there were my keys on the welcome mat outside my front door, covered in something red. That's when I realized I might have messed up by putting my address on Craigslist for that ad. I'll see what happens tonight. But I'll be honest, I'm starting to think I might leave early and not stay here for the rest of the rent. I thought I was just buying a phone, but what I found on it turned my life upside down. Watch as a simple Craigslist purchase leads to a horrifying discovery that will make you think twice about secondhand deals. My current phone has become a bit slow, so I decided to buy a new one from Craigslist. Within a few minutes, I stumbled upon what seemed like the perfect deal, a brand new iPhone 12 for just $400. So I tried to contact the seller right away. However, they didn't respond. I found it a bit odd but brushed it off, thinking they might be busy. I kept messaging him but still got no reply. Eventually he did respond but only sent me his address and nothing else. When I replied, he didn't say anything more and just kept ignoring me after giving me the address. The next day, I made a dumb decision and went to his house. As I drove down the rough street, it looked like no one lived in any of the houses, but I ignored it and went to his place. The house was dark, and the wood looked old and bumpy. As I walked to the front door, I saw the grass was tall and rough, almost up to my knees, like a whole foot high. When I got closer to the front door, it just swung open. Then, out of nowhere, the guy came out and yelled, "Do you want the phone or not?" He had a deep voice. I said, "Yeah, I have $400 in cash. Is that okay?" He grabbed it from me and slammed the door in my face. I started yelling, "Hey man, what's going on?" I was getting angry and upset at the same time, not knowing what to do. He kept me waiting at the door for what felt like a really long time. Eventually, he opened it just enough to hand me the phone. I took it and said thanks. Then I turned around and walked away. I didn't hear him close the door. When I started my car, I looked back and saw him still staring at me. It gave me the creeps, so I pushed down hard on the gas pedal and sped off down the street. When I got home, I was too tired to set up the phone. I fell asleep as soon as my head touched the pillow. When I woke up and turned on the phone, I noticed something odd. It was still logged in with the previous owner's account, probably the creepy guy who sold it to me. Feeling a bit nosy and curious, I opened the phone. It turns out the guy didn't even have a password. When I went to the Photos app, there were no photos in the camera roll. But then I checked the albums, and that's when I found something. There was an album titled "A Fun Night" with a winking emoji at the end. I thought the pictures or videos in there would be really unique, but they weren't. There were only 2 videos. Then I did something I regretted. I played the first video. When it started, the screen was black, and all I could hear was the sound of gentle rain. After a few seconds, the camera moved up. It startled me. It happened so fast. The camera was facing a car outside. It stayed focused on that car for more than 30 seconds. What's happening? I thought to myself, confused as I sat on my bed watching this video. Then suddenly, a woman opened the car door and stepped out. I didn't know this woman and had never seen her before. The camera kept focusing on her, and then a man started laughing like a maniac. That's when I froze. I recognized that voice. It was the same voice as the man who sold me this phone. I wondered, is this video some kind of joke? After the first video ended, I watched the second one. I noticed it was much longer than the first. The first one was 2 minutes long, but this one was 7 minutes. It began with a black screen and the sound of rain, just like the first one. But this time it was in an old warehouse. Around 45 seconds in, I heard faint crying like a woman's. I didn't watch the video because my gut feeling told me something wasn't right. I didn't waste any more time and called the police. I showed them the video and explained how I got the phone. Thankfully, they took it seriously and went to the creepy guy's house, but he was already gone. The house wasn't his. It was just an abandoned house. The police took my phone to find more information. It has been a while and I still haven't gotten my phone back. So next time I should just buy a phone from a mobile shop. A routine walk in the park turned into a race for survival when I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin and a desperate girl inside. What happened next is straight out of a nightmare. Stay tuned to find out more. I often go for walks around my neighborhood, but this time I decided to explore new territories. One day I found out there's a park a few miles from my house. The park is really big, with lots of trees and open spaces. I'm pretty sure there are more trails than I even know about. As I was walking around enjoying the sights, I spotted the opening of a trail that seemed different from the ones I usually take. It really caught my eye, so without thinking much, I started exploring it. It was getting darker, probably just after 7 o'clock, and because of that, I wasn't planning on going too far from the main path. The park had a rule that everyone needed to leave by a certain time. Also, I didn't want to be alone in the woods when it got dark. So after walking for a bit, I ended up leaving the main trail and exploring a different part of the park. I must have walked for more than a mile. When I figured it was time to head back home, it was getting darker, and I was worried about getting lost. But just before I decided to go back, I saw a cabin off to the left in the distance. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to check it out. I'm really glad I did, even though the night turned out to be the scariest night of my life. As I approached the cabin, the daylight seemed to fade away rapidly, making everything dark. I knew I should have left, but I couldn't resist checking out the cabin. I started worrying about how far I'd wandered, thinking I might be on someone's private land. This park I'm talking about isn't like a camping site or anything. It's just a regular park. The cabin looked abandoned and hadn't been taken care of for years. I walked around it, staying at least 20 feet away in case someone was there. Suddenly I heard a loud noise like someone hitting something really hard. It scared me, and I almost ran off, but then I took a few steps closer to see where the noise was coming from. When I went to the back of the cabin, I saw a girl about my age in the basement banging on the window and shouting for help. I could tell right away that something was really bad. I ran to her and tried to open the window, but then she looked even more scared and signaled me to be quiet by putting her finger to her lips. I understood right away that she wanted me to stay silent. I saw I couldn't open the window, and I knew I had to do something fast. So I tried to call the police on my phone, but there was no signal. I felt trapped, not knowing what to do. The girl kept looking at the door, and I could tell someone was about to come. I didn't waste any more time. I turned around and ran back towards the trail as fast as I could. My mind was racing, and I knew I had to get to the main path before it got any darker. I didn't look back and just kept running. As I ran, I heard footsteps behind me getting closer. I didn't stop or slow down, just kept running faster. It felt like forever, but I finally reached the main path. The footsteps behind me stopped, but I didn't slow down. I kept running until I got out of the park. Once I was out, I called the police and told them everything. They searched the area and found the girl and the cabin. It turned out she had been kidnapped a few days earlier. I was glad she was safe, but it took me a long time to feel safe myself. Now, I always stick to the main trails and never wander off alone. An innocent stay at a quaint motel took a terrifying turn when I woke up to find the owners standing at the end of my bed. Their reason for being there was more bizarre than you could imagine. Don't miss this unsettling tale. 2 years ago, my girlfriend and I went on a road trip. We were supposed to drive for 2 days. At the end of the first day, we stopped to sleep at an old motel. It looked cool with lots of colors, small trees, and plants everywhere. An old couple worked there and said they owned the place. They were nice, and we talked about our trip. Then, we went to our room and unpacked. The room wasn't very nice, to be honest. It was old and not updated, but we felt happy staying there because the old couple was friendly, and we wanted to support them. My girlfriend and I watched TV for a while before we got tired. Then, I turned off the TV and lights, and we went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard footsteps in our room. I was still sleepy, so I looked around but didn't see anything and went back to sleep again. Later, I woke up again feeling like someone was watching me. I looked up and saw the old couple standing at the end of the bed, smiling at me. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I asked them why they were there. The old woman said they were just checking if we were sleeping well. I thought they were crazy. My girlfriend said she was calling the police and took out her phone. The old man apologized and said it wasn't necessary, but she called the police anyway. I told the old couple to leave our room. They kept saying sorry and then left. The police arrived within a few minutes. The old couple confessed to entering our room with a spare key, but they still said they just wanted to check if we were okay. This was one of the weirdest things I ever heard. The police asked if we wanted to press charges, but we said no. I felt sorry for them and thought they were just strange. The rest of our trip was good, but now whenever we stay at a hotel, we make sure to check the door twice. Moving to a new city is always challenging, but nothing prepared me for the sinister behavior of my new roommate. What I found in his room one night made my blood run cold. Watch to uncover the eerie truth. About 10 years ago, I moved to Seattle. When I arrived, I didn't have a job or a place to stay. It's hard to rent a place without a job, even though I had some money saved up. I didn't have many choices for where to live. So I looked at ads on Craigslist and Facebook, but it was rare to find a place that would let me rent it. Then one day I found a room to rent on Craigslist. It was one room in the basement of a house, and it had its own bathroom. It cost a lot, even though it was just a room. I believe it was about $800 per month, paid up front. When I got there, the landlord welcomed me and gave me a tour of the house. The house was pretty old, and there wasn't a living room, only a kitchen and laundry room that everyone shared. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, and downstairs, there were 2 more. At the time, 3 other people lived there, and they all seemed friendly when I first met them. There was an older man called George, a young woman named Angela, and a guy in his mid-30s named Kirk. I didn't talk to them much because I was busy moving in and searching for a job. The first few days were kind of boring. I'd see the other roommates around, but we didn't really talk much. It wasn't until about a week later that things got strange. I remember one day when I came home and noticed Kirk was acting weird. He looked a bit upset, kept walking around in the kitchen, and when he noticed me, his mood changed instantly. He said hi with a smile. That night I heard odd sounds coming from Kirk's room. His room was in the basement, close to mine. It sounded like he was moving furniture or something. That was definitely a warning sign. In the morning I went to make coffee, and Kirk walked in. We didn't speak, but there was a weird feeling in the air, and I felt really uncomfortable, though I couldn't say why. In the following days, I began to notice more strange things about Kirk. He would often come home late at night, and I could hear him talking quietly to himself in his room. I thought he was on his phone at first, but that didn't seem right. I'm pretty sure he was talking to himself. One night I woke up to the sound of screaming. It was coming from Angela's room. I got out of bed and ran towards the room, but as I got closer, I could hear Kirk's voice, and he was saying something to Angela. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed back and listened. After a few minutes, the screaming stopped, and everything went quiet. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I told Angela what happened. She looked really scared and didn't want to talk about it. I knew something was really wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any evidence that something was really wrong. In the following days, Kirk seemed to get even worse. He would get angry over small things. Then about a week later, Kirk stopped coming out of his room altogether. I was starting to worry about my safety and the safety of the other roommates. It wasn't until a few days later that everything got really bad. When I came home from work, I found George sitting on the front porch, looking very upset. He told me he went into Kirk's room to ask him to turn down the music, but he found something really scary. There were knives and other sharp things all over the room, and there was a big stain that looked like blood on the floor. We called the police and told them what George found. They came and searched the house. They found out that Kirk had left. He probably ran away as soon as George saw his room. The police found proof that he was planning something really bad. They managed to find Kirk a few days later. He got arrested and faced charges. When I put my dining room set up for sale on Craigslist, I never expected it would lead to a life-threatening encounter with a man hiding in my pantry, armed and ready to strike. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist for $1,200 and included slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers, likely because I lived in a rural area. Eventually, I received a call from a man who sounded a bit off but wanted to check out the set. I gave him my address, and he said he'd be over within the hour. I dusted the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes, surprising me because he must have lived nearby, which was unusual in my area. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He wore a stained undershirt, baggy pants with tears, and had a gray mustache stained brown in the middle. His hair was a complete mess. Despite my discomfort, I invited him in. He immediately focused on the dining room set, walking around slowly, making weird sounds, and touching every inch of the furniture. To break the silence, I reminded him that the asking price was $1,200. He stopped, looked at me with an unnerving smile, and offered $500. I laughed at the insane offer, thinking he was joking, but his smile turned angry. I apologized and said $1,000 was the lowest I could go. He started acting even stranger, putting his hands to his head, making strange noises and pacing. He then looked at me with anger and hatred. Realizing this man wasn't right in the head, I needed him out of my house. I thanked him for coming, hinting it was time for him to leave, but he didn't move. His stare was full of malice. Fearing for my safety, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed my .45, and hid behind the wall, peeking into the dining room. The man was gone. I locked my bedroom door and called the police. While hiding, I heard sirens. I stayed put until the police arrived. I came out with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They asked me to wait outside while they searched the house. After about 5 minutes, the police emerged with the man in handcuffs. They told me he was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. It felt like a miracle that the police weren't shot. What still haunts me is the look of malice and hatred he gave me from the police car as it drove off. I can't shake the fear that he'll come back for me once he gets out of jail. I'm seriously considering moving to escape the constant paranoia. Imagine searching for your first apartment on Craigslist and finding yourself in an abandoned house with a menacing stranger leading you to a basement filled with horrors. This happened to Amanda. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda, my brother's girlfriend, was looking for her first apartment and decided to find a roommate online. She found an ad on Craigslist titled "Roommate Wanted Females Only." The listing was for a room in a house for $225 a month, which was cheap for the area. The occupant described herself as a 23-year-old college student uncomfortable living with males. Amanda liked the place, but there was only one photo of the house's exterior. She emailed the occupant and quickly got a reply with details and a time to visit. When Amanda arrived, there was a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door. The house looked nice but slightly unkempt." She knocked on the back door, and an older man answered, claiming to be the landlord. He said the occupant was out and had asked him to show her around. Amanda felt uneasy as the man, who appeared to be in his 40s and unkempt, showed her the house. Only the kitchen light was on, and there was no furniture. The landlord was irritable, rushing her through the rooms and only letting her look briefly. He refused to open one room, saying it was the occupant's and he didn't want to invade her privacy. Amanda noticed the front door had a plank nailed across it. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Amanda thanked the man and tried to leave. He then insisted on showing her the basement, claiming it was recently furnished. They were in a small hallway near the basement door, which opened outward, creating a barrier. The basement was pitch black, and he motioned for her to go down first. At that moment, Amanda received a text. Thinking quickly, she pretended it was a call from someone outside the house. She excused herself and walked out the back door, sprinting to her car and speeding away. At home, she told her family everything, and they called the police. The Craigslist post had been removed, and the house had been abandoned for over 6 months. In the room the landlord didn't open, police found a pile of dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty jugs. The walls were covered with ripped-up pages from porn magazines. In the basement, they found a thin piece of fishing twine at shin level across the stairs, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with rolls of assorted teeth. Selling a dining room set on Craigslist seemed harmless, until I found myself face to face with a dangerous man who left me fearing for my life and questioning my safety at home. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist for $1,200 and included slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers, likely because I lived in a rural area. Eventually, I received a call from a man who sounded a bit off but wanted to check out the set. I gave him my address, and he said he'd be over within the hour. I dusted the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes, surprising me because he must have lived nearby, which was unusual in my area. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He wore a stained undershirt, baggy pants with tears, and had a gray mustache stained brown in the middle. His hair was a complete mess. Despite my discomfort, I invited him in. He immediately focused on the dining room set, walking around slowly, making weird sounds, and touching every inch of the furniture. To break the silence, I reminded him that the asking price was $1,200. He stopped, looked at me with an unnerving smile, and offered $500. I laughed at the insane offer, thinking he was joking, but his smile turned angry. I apologized and said $1,000 was the lowest I could go. He started acting even stranger, putting his hands to his head, making strange noises and pacing. He then looked at me with anger and hatred. Realizing this man wasn't right in the head, I needed him out of my house. I thanked him for coming, hinting it was time for him to leave, but he didn't move. His stare was full of malice. Fearing for my safety, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed my .45, and hid behind the wall, peeking into the dining room. The man was gone. I locked my bedroom door and called the police. While hiding, I heard sirens. I stayed put until the police arrived. I came out with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They asked me to wait outside while they searched the house. After about 5 minutes, the police emerged with the man in handcuffs. They told me he was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. It felt like a miracle that the police weren't shot. What still haunts me is the look of malice and hatred he gave me from the police car as it drove off. I can't shake the fear that he'll come back for me once he gets out of jail. I'm seriously considering moving to escape the constant paranoia. I have a Craigslist horror story that I'd like to share, serving as a cautionary tale for those using such websites. A few years ago, I was selling my old MacBook Pro laptop. It was still fairly new, and since I had received a new one from work, I decided to put it up for sale on Craigslist for $1,000. It was a reasonable price considering its condition and value. Within 24 hours of posting the ad, I received a text from someone expressing interest in buying the laptop. I confirmed the price of $1,000 and suggested meeting in a public place for safety reasons. The person proposed Walmart, which seemed like a reasonable choice due to its high visibility and foot traffic. However, what raised a red flag was the person's insistence on meeting at 10 p.m. or later, claiming they worked overnight shifts. Despite my reservations, I agreed to the meeting time. When I asked for their name, they identified themselves as Derek, providing only a vague description of being of average height with dark hair. Despite the uncertainty, we settled on meeting at 10:15 p.m. the following night at Walmart. Arriving shortly after 10 p.m., I parked in the middle of the parking lot, which by then was eerily quiet as the store was set to close at 11 p.m. I believe I texted Derek to let him know that I was at the agreed meeting spot. However, he didn't respond for a while, leaving me waiting and growing increasingly frustrated. It wasn't until around 10:30 p.m. that he finally replied, informing me that he would arrive in about 15 minutes. Despite my annoyance, I decided to wait patiently, hoping that selling the laptop would make it worth the wait. As time ticked by and it approached 11 p.m., I was on the verge of leaving when Derek finally texted me, claiming he had arrived and was at the back of the parking lot. Scanning the area, I couldn't spot him from where I was parked, eager to conclude the transaction. I drove towards the rear of the parking lot, where several cars were scattered randomly. Unsure which one belonged to Derek, I parked in a random spot and asked him again for his location. With no immediate response from Derek, I suddenly spotted a car approaching. Assuming it was him, I watched as it drew nearer, only to realize that the driver and passengers were all wearing black ski masks. Sensing danger, I swiftly drove away, prompting the car to follow me briefly. However, as we reached the front of the parking lot, I noticed a police car stationed there. Seizing the opportunity, I drove towards the police car, prompting the car behind me to make a hasty U-turn in the narrow parking island. Thankfully, the ploy worked, and the suspicious individuals disappeared. Relieved, I drove home and promptly blocked Derek's number. Subsequently, I removed my laptop from Craigslist and opted to list it on eBay instead. Roughly 2 years ago, I decided to sell my old phone on Craigslist after upgrading to a new one. The phone was only 2 years old and in good condition, so I thought it would attract buyers. After considering eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and Craigslist, I opted for the latter, prioritizing a quick sale over making a profit. Listing the phone at a reasonable price, I received a text message expressing interest within a few hours, The potential buyer, Molly, seemed eager, so we arranged to meet the following day outside a local strip mall, conveniently located for both of us. When we met, the transaction went smoothly, and Molly purchased the phone without any issues. Everything appeared normal during our brief interaction, and there were no red flags. However, things took a strange turn in the days that followed. Molly began texting me, initially asking me to come over and then inquiring if she could visit my place. It was unexpected and out of context, considering our interaction had been solely about the phone sale. At first I wondered if she had the wrong number, but then she mentioned my name, indicating she was indeed contacting me intentionally. I had no interest in pursuing any further interaction with Molly beyond the sale, and her persistent texts, which continued late into the night and into the next morning, left me feeling uncomfortable and confused. Once again, Molly persisted in her attempts to come over, ignoring my previous attempts to deter her. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I lied and told her I had a girlfriend, hoping she would take the hint and leave me alone. However, Molly disregarded my statement, insisting it didn't matter, and continued texting me as if we were close friends, asking about my activities. Feeling bewildered by her behavior, I asked her to stop, but she became angry and started hurling insults at me. Frustrated and alarmed, I decided to block her, hoping to put an end to the unsettling situation. Little did I know, the ordeal was far from over. Later that same night, I heard a knock at my front door. Peering through the window, I was stunned to see Molly standing outside. How did she find out where I lived? It was alarming to think she might have followed me home. Reluctantly, I answered the door, intending to firmly tell her to leave. However, as soon as I opened the door, Molly launched into a tirade of curses and refused to leave. Growing increasingly aggressive, she attempted to enter my house. In a panic, I slammed the door shut and locked it, but she persisted, banging on windows and trying to force her way inside. Realizing I needed help, I called the police and waited inside. Molly continued her relentless assault on my home, banging on windows and attempting to open doors. Even when I tried to reason with her through a window, she remained undeterred. Thankfully, the police arrived and were able to intervene, putting an end to Molly's alarming behavior. Subsequently, I obtained a restraining order against her, as I couldn't comprehend why she fixated on me so intensely. I suspected drugs might be involved, but I couldn't say for sure. This experience served as a stark reminder to exercise caution when using platforms like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. That night changed everything. Now every shadow holds their sinister secrets. In 2018, I experienced a divorce that left me with virtually nothing. I relocated to a small home, but it was empty. I lacked furniture, appliances, everything, really. The task of furnishing my place seemed daunting, particularly from a financial standpoint. So I saw this as an opportunity to find discounted items on Craigslist. My main focus was on big-ticket items like a couch and a TV. Finding deals didn't prove difficult. I reached out to a few sellers and made some purchases. During this process, I came across a listing for a TV stand posted for $40. It looked like a typical wooden TV stand. The seller, Matt, however, had specific conditions for pickup. He insisted it had to be after 9 on weekdays due to his work schedule, ruling out weekends entirely. While this arrangement still suited me, I found his strictness somewhat peculiar. I assumed this specificity was why the item hadn't been sold yet. I agreed to pick up the TV stand on a Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. On the appointed day, I confirmed with Matt and received his address. The town he lived in was unfamiliar to me, only mentioned in passing conversations. Soon I understood why. Most of the homes were dilapidated, with aging infrastructure. Even the streetlights were mostly non-functional. Pulling up to Matt's house didn't ease my unease. It matched the rundown appearance of the surrounding homes, illuminated only by a dim hallway light. I counted out $40 and tucked the bills into my pocket before stepping out of my car and onto his porch. As I waited for him to answer the doorbell, I glanced around his yard. It was cluttered with various items, garden statues, eclectic decorations scattered about. The porch itself was adorned with knickknacks and oddities. Then he opened the door. Matt was a tall and skinnier-looking man, probably in his 40s, I observed. He wore a tired expression, as if he hadn't slept in days. As he welcomed me inside, I could smell booze on his breath. If I'd known beforehand that this was who I'd be buying from, I never even would have come here, I thought, but it was too late for that now. As we walked down the hall, stuff was scattered all around the house. It wasn't like a hoarder's home you'd see on TV, but more like an abandoned house that had been trashed by random teenagers. When we reached the living room in the back of the house, he pointed at the TV stand. The room was barely lit, making it hard to see the condition it was in. "Any chance you could turn on the light for me?" I asked politely. Matt didn't respond, but walked over to the wall and flicked on a small lamp in the corner. It was around this time that I got a really weird feeling that something was wrong. And before I even got to look at the TV stand, I heard someone else behind me. Another man had come around the corner, standing next to Matt. He didn't say hello or anything, just watched me. I was really unsure what to make of this and didn't want to overreact right away, but I was also getting really uncomfortable as that eerie feeling only grew larger. I was standing there trying to think of what to say or do, but then Matt walked past me and stood in front of the TV stand. They were now on either side of me, facing me and not speaking. Several long seconds passed as nobody spoke or moved. Before I quickly walked past the other guy and down the hallway toward the front door, I made a hasty exit. As I left, I heard them laughing in the room behind me, like this was funny, and as I got halfway to my car, the front doors slammed shut. I can't even find any reasons for what occurred that night or what those two guys were trying to do. Maybe it was just some sick joke they were pulling, trying to get me to freak out, or maybe it was something more sinister. I don't plan on finding out though. At 23, I was on the hunt for a studio apartment to rent. Fresh out of college, I had next to no money, barely scraping by on a bit more than minimum wage. My primary focus was finding the cheapest possible option available. Initially, I searched for both one-bedroom apartments and studios. However, as the weeks went by, it became increasingly clear that those options were simply not financially feasible. Reluctantly, I turned to Craigslist, despite its less than stellar reputation. One of my friends had a positive experience and recommended it, so I decided to give it a shot. On the first day of browsing Craigslist, I didn't come across anything suitable, though the sheer volume of listings gave me a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, none of them matched my location or price requirements. It was around the third or fourth day of searching that I stumbled upon a new listing that caught my attention. Located a few miles away, it was for a studio in a small apartment building. Despite the low-quality, pixelated pictures, I decided to investigate further, intrigued by the promising details. I reached out to the owner, who responded promptly, and we arranged a tour for later that evening at 7. In our brief exchange, nothing struck me as out of the ordinary about the owner. His messages were professional, and he appeared eager to show me the place. A couple of hours later, I got into my car and started driving over to the address he sent me. It's worth noting that I was aware beforehand that this wasn't a particularly nice area of our city, but it was the most affordable. Honestly, I didn't think it was too bad, although looking back, perhaps I was just being naive because it seemed like my only option. Upon arriving, I pulled up to a rather old-looking apartment building. Parking on the side of the street, I texted the man to let him know I had arrived, then proceeded to walk up to the front door. Not spotting the man anywhere, I buzzed the room and waited for a few seconds before the door unlocked. Stepping inside, I was greeted by a staircase in the middle and 2 rooms on either side. Before I could even glance at the room numbers, a voice echoed from somewhere above the staircase, informing me that they were on the 3rd floor. Assuming the man was addressing me, I began ascending the stairs. However, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease at his absence from the door, especially considering how professional he had been in our text exchanges. Upon reaching the top of the steps, I found myself in a small hallway with 2 doors, one of which was open. I walked over and peered inside, only to find a man standing a few feet away, looking back at me. He greeted me warmly, shook my hand, and invited me inside. Yet my confusion was immediate. The place was clearly inhabited, with a couch, TV, chairs, and even food on the counters. It was unmistakably lived in. "Does someone else live here?" I asked kindly. The man quickly replied with a short laugh and said, "No one lived here and everything would be gone by tomorrow." I smiled and said, "Okay, though that response didn't sit right with me." He started leading me further in, pointing out features of the place. But it suddenly dawned on me that this wasn't even a studio. There were multiple doors, surely leading to other rooms. This was at least a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And there was no way the price could be what he said it was. It seemed like he noticed my suspicions as he stopped what he was saying and moved toward the hallway. He opened one of the doors that clearly led to a bedroom and started telling me to take a look inside. But before I could answer, we were interrupted when my phone chimed. I pulled it out of my pocket and checked who it was. My face went pale, seeing it was from the man from Craigslist asking where I was. I looked up in horror, realizing what had happened, and I could tell that whoever this guy was in front of me knew that I'd figured it out. This terrifying moment passed, and the guy didn't move or say anything. He just stood and looked at me with a blank stare. After a moment, I hurried out of there and down the stairs, not hearing the guy follow. I got in my car and left, feeling horrified. I never even texted the actual man back, as I was no longer interested in staying anywhere near that place. And I didn't know if maybe he was in on it too, somehow. But whoever that guy was who lured me into his home was so close to being able to probably abduct me. I don't know. And I don't even want to know. But I never opened Craigslist again after that night.